Greetings, everyone. It is Testy Tuesday, and we got some really good stuff for you today. And right, Betsy? Right? You bet. Yeah, you got a little cold there, or maybe it's humidity. Just the humidity getting to her. Boy, it's been a hot one today. Hey, I'm going to give you a test question, and it happens to center on not just, but a book of the Bible that you probably haven't read for a while, and that is the book of Ezekiel, the prophet Ezekiel. In fact, we don't have a lot of our lectionary readings that come from Ezekiel, but when they do, oh boy, are they good ones. It's a lengthy prophet, and let me just give you a word of warning. If you have not read Ezekiel recently, be prepared, okay? Let's just say Ezekiel was made into a movie. It would definitely be rated R, and probably, from some folks, receive a rating of X. Yes, it gets pretty graphic at times. In other words, you don't want anyone younger than 12 watching this thing, okay? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. But it also has a lot of words of hope. Hope for the people back then going through a difficult time that we're going to talk about in a second, but also for us too. All right, so what's the difficult time we're talking about? We're talking about Babylon, and Babylon is coming in, and now it's getting ready to take over Judah and level Jerusalem, this, that, and the other. Well, who is the king of Babylon who pulled all this off? That is your Testy Tuesday question. The king of Babylon, was it Zedekiah? Was it Nebuchadnezzar? Was it Jehoiachin? Or was it Solomon? Want those again? Zedekiah, Nebuchadnezzar, Jehoiachin, or Solomon? Of course it wasn't Solomon, although he was the last of the first really big kings of Israel. But after Solomon, Israel went into a civil war, so to speak, and split Israel to the north, Judah to the south. Israel gets wiped out by the Assyrians. Judah hangs on for a while, but now Babylon comes in and says, enough's enough, done with. The correct answer, the king that finally came in and took over Judah and deported a lot of people to Babylon, was Nebuchadnezzar. If you've ever been to an Easter vigil and you read some of the stories concerning Nebuchadnezzar, it's a lot of fun. We have a good time with our noisemakers with Nebuchadnezzar. Ask me about it sometime, okay? Anyhow, okay, so what's up with this passage from Ezekiel? Ezekiel is written during the Babylonian exile, just before and also during it. And, well, to make a long story short, the kings of, and I say kings plural, of Israel, or of Judah rather, Israel's already gone. They were wiped out by the Assyrians. But Judah, they just didn't want to listen to any of the prophets. And you had Jeremiah, you had Isaiah, you had Ezekiel. That didn't want to listen to them. And Ezekiel had told them, now look, you better stop playing this game between trying to appease Babylon and trying to appease Egypt. Because Egypt and Babylon, they were kind of going against each other, and they were vying for the favor of Judah. And that just wasn't happening. In fact, what ended up happening was the last king, who I put as one of our answers there, Zedekiah, he was taken into captivity in Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. He was blinded. He eventually was killed there. But before all that, he executed all of Zedekiah's children in front of him. Public execution. Why did he do that? He wanted to put an end to the Davidic line of kings. Over and done with. So, where does that bring Ezekiel into the story? Ezekiel, even though he had a lot to say to the people of Judah for their unfaithfulness and why all this disaster was coming upon him, he also had words of warning to the surrounding nations too, but he had words of hope and comfort, and that's part of our lesson for this Sunday. In fact, the lesson that we have is only 3 verses long, 22, 23, 24 of chapter 17. And it talks about God taking the top of a cedar tree, a little sprig from the top, and planting it on a high and lofty mountain of Israel, meaning the territory Israel to the south too. And what would that be? Well, that would be Jerusalem. Mount Zion, Jerusalem, all right? And how God was going to once again let that cedar tree grow and spread its branches so that birds from all over would come and rest underneath them. It would be fruitful, and birds from all over the world would make their nests and have their babies, and it would just be one grand and glorious thing, and the whole world would know that Yahweh is God. Oh, well, why are we having that lesson this week? Well, our gospel lesson from the Gospel of Mark has a couple of agricultural type of parables in it, and one of them is planting that mustard seed that grows up into a mighty bush, a mighty tree, so that all the birds of the air nest underneath it. Now that sounds nice and sweet and cute, but it has a very significant meaning, especially for the people who would be coming back from exile in Babylon. Not what Jesus said, but what Ezekiel said, saying the same thing about this mighty cedar tree that now has these branches that spread out and birds from all over come. Well, this is what was the surprise for the people. Now they're hoping to get back to their homeland, which they do, but God has said, hey, it's not just going to be for you, it's going to be for all peoples of the world. This is going to be good news for everybody. And remember that promise made to Abraham way back there in the Old Testament at the beginning, when he said, I will bless all peoples of the world through you? Well, this blessing, God is keeping his word. Yahweh is going to be there and doing it. And what's kind of interesting, though, is if you want to read a little bit before this, read the entire chapter of Ezekiel chapter 17, because what he talks about before that is the story of Babylon and Egypt and how they both came to power and took over Judah, and uses the same images of somebody swooping in, eagles, and taking parts of the branches and planting them somewhere else. Ezekiel right here says, there's one more thing to say, and that is Yahweh does the same thing, only his is for real, and his is an everlasting covenant that will not be broken. The Davidic line will be restored. And you will, as a people, be a blessing to all the world. Okay, well, hopefully you got the name Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, say that 20 times real fast. No, don't. Nebuchadnezzar. An interesting king, but one who eventually had his comeuppance too, especially as the years went on and Cyrus the Persian took over. Cyrus, who enabled and allowed the people of Judah to come back and reestablish their own hometown, their government, even gave them money to help rebuild the temple. There's a lot of neat things that Cyrus did, although the people were still under his rule of thumb. And It wasn't always the prettiest thing, but hey, it was better than being back there in Babylon. Blessings be with you. Enjoy this nice warm weather.